In August of 2023, 73-year-old Roger Leadbeater was taking his usual evening walk with his rescue dog Max through a quiet park in Sheffield when he was suddenly hunted and murdered in one of the most savage random attacks in UK history. Security footage later showed 32-year-old Emma Boroway, a schizophrenic patient who had escaped from a psychiatric unit 2 days earlier, pacing around the park and hiding in the bushes before ambushing him. She stabbed Roger more than 50 times, including through the eye and repeatedly in the back as he tried to crawl away, inflicting a total of 124 separate injuries. His hands, arms, and legs were covered in defensive wounds, showing he fought desperately until he collapsed and died on the ground. When his family returned days later to leave flowers in the spot he died, they found the scene still covered in his blood, with the outline of his body visible and dog prints stamped around it. Emma later told police the devil had tricked her and called the killing a ritual sacrifice. She had previously killed animals, threatened staff, and repeatedly escaped custody. 4 months after being charged with Roger's murder, she took her own life in prison, while an inquest ruled his death was caused by catastrophic failures in mental health supervision. No matter what. This disturbing ring camera footage shows a disheveled woman wearing a white dress wandering through a residential stairway in the middle of the night while holding a knife in her mouth. She paces back and forth, systematically trying apartment doors, stopping at each one to see if it's unlocked. When she realizes they're locked, she bends down and checks under the doormats, clearly searching for hidden spare keys before moving on to the next door. She even stares directly into the camera while moving from door to door, seemingly unaware or unconcerned by how terrifying she looks. Still armed, she walks up the stairs to another floor and continues scanning hallways, before reportedly lingering outside more apartments as the video cuts off. Her appearance, combined with the fact that she was half-dressed and carrying a knife in her mouth, made many people fear that she wasn't simply trespassing, but was potentially on drugs or mentally ill while actively looking for someone to hurt, showing how close a single unlocked door can come to turning into something far worse. Whale carcass and thought it would be a good idea to climb on top of it. What they didn't realize is that they were sitting on skin that was already soft and tearing apart, meaning they easily could have fallen straight through and into the whale's guts. Once inside, the collapsing flesh and toxic gases could trap them, suffocate them, or crush them before anyone could help. Additionally, a dead whale is basically a massive rotting pressure tank. As the body decomposes, bacteria inside release huge amounts of methane and other gases that stretch the skin like a balloon. Even a small shift in weight or a tiny puncture can make the entire thing rupture. And this isn't just disturbing or gross, but can even be deadly. In 2013, a dead sperm whale in the Faroe Islands exploded after someone cut into it, killing a man who was standing nearby. In Taiwan in 2004, a whale carcass detonated while being transported through a city, injuring dozens and covering streets in blood and organs. And in Oregon in 1970, officials tried to blow up a beached whale with dynamite, launching massive chunks of blubber hundreds of feet, destroying several cars and nearly killing spectators. At the height of her Disney fame, Ashley Tisdale was battling serious health and mental struggles. Since childhood, she had suffered from severe anxiety and panic attacks, and during her High School Musical years, they became so intense that she was repeatedly rushed to hospitals believing she was having heart attacks until doctors realized it was panic. The stress left her barely eating and constantly exhausted. In 2007, at 21 years old, months of unexplained pain led doctors to discover a tumor in her breast that required surgery, later confirmed to be benign. Years later, she revealed she developed alopecia, causing patches of her hair to fall out from stress and autoimmune issues, saying the pressure to appear fine through the years came at a real cost to her health. In January of 2026 in Pennsylvania, 11-year-old Clayton Dietz fatally shot his adoptive father, Douglas Dietz, on the night of the boy's own birthday after his Nintendo Switch was taken away from him. Police say the child waited until his father fell asleep on the couch, found the key to his gun safe, loaded a handgun, and shot him once in the head. The boy later admitted he did it out of anger over losing his game console. Douglas Dietz died at the scene, while prosecutors charged the boy with criminal homicide and moved to try him as an adult, calling the case one of the most disturbing juvenile killings in recent years. Egg vanished in August of 2018 after suddenly disappearing from his San Francisco home. Weeks later, police went to the house for a welfare check and discovered a hidden room concealed behind a fake wall. Inside was a single large fish tank containing Brian's body, decapitated and missing both hands. Investigators later determined he'd been murdered by his roommate after an argument over rent and drug money while the two were using cocaine. After killing him, the roommate cut off Brian's head and hands, hid the body in the aquarium, filled it with water to slow down the decomposition, and sealed the room behind a fake wall. The killer, named Jeffrey Francisco, then fled the state but was eventually tracked down and arrested. Although he was originally charged with murder and facing several decades in prison, Francisco was allowed to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter, which made him eligible for early parole. In 2021, after only serving about 7 years of a 15-year sentence, the killer was released, a decision that sparked outrage when the public learned he was free. When Sophia Scott was 3 years old, her parents noticed her speaking and development were going backwards. The day before her 4th birthday, doctors told her family she had Sanfilippo syndrome, a rare genetic disease that prevents the body from breaking down certain sugars, causing them to build up in the brain and slowly destroy the nervous system. They were told there was no treatment and that she was unlikely to survive past her teenage years. Sophia developed mostly normally at first, but around age 6 she began to decline. Over time, she lost her speech, memory, and her ability to walk and care for herself. She later developed seizures, sleep apnea, scoliosis, bowel problems, and more than 30 different symptoms. Sanfilippo syndrome is often called childhood Alzheimer's, and most children begin showing symptoms between ages 1 and 4, usually dying in their teens. Now 15 years old, Sophia has lost much of her abilities. Her family continues searching for experimental treatment, but doctors believe it may be too late to reverse the damage. In the final stages of this disease, the brain forgets how to control basic functions like swallowing and breathing, and most patients die from complications such as pneumonia, respiratory failure, or cardiac arrest.
Oh, she died.
Where's the remote?
Oh my God.
That was the moment a group of friends accidentally recorded the exact second the world learned Princess Diana was dead. In the early hours of August 31st, 1997, Princess Diana and Dottie Fayed left the Ritz Hotel in Paris after being followed by paparazzi. Their driver sped through the city, apparently trying to lose them, and lost control inside the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, slamming directly into a concrete support pillar. The impact killed the driver and Dottie Fayed instantly. Diana was pulled from the wreck alive and rushed to the hospital, where doctors desperately fought for hours to save her. At first, reports said she was only injured, and most people couldn't even fathom the idea that she might actually die. News stations described her condition as serious but stable, and the world waited for updates, not realizing how bad it really was. At 4 a.m., French officials confirmed she had died from massive internal injuries at just 36 years old. The news spread instantly as broadcasts were interrupted, radios were stopped, and millions woke up to headlines announcing the sudden death of the most famous woman on Earth. Within hours, crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, covering the gates with flowers and letters. One man in the car did survive the crash, Diana's bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones. He was the only person wearing a seatbelt, but still broke just about every bone in his face, lost much of his memory, and later said the trauma haunted him for the rest of his life. Investigators later found that driver Henry Paul was heavily intoxicated and driving at extremely high speed. They also confirmed that Diana was not wearing a seatbelt, and experts believe that if she had been restrained, she likely would have survived. Her death became one of the largest public mourning events in world history, with over 2 billion people watching her funeral and an entire generation remembering exactly where they were when they heard of her passing. After her funeral, Diana was buried on a small island in the middle of a lake on her family's property in England. The grave is surrounded by water and trees and is not accessible to the public. Shakur was shot and killed at the age of 25 in September of 1996. His longtime rival, the notorious B.I.G., was reportedly devastated. Despite their very public feud, multiple people close to Biggie said he cried when he heard the news and appeared genuinely shaken, telling friends, "Shit got effed up somewhere along the way, but that was my end." The two had once been close friends, but everything changed in 1994 when Tupac was robbed and shot 5 times at a New York recording studio. Tupac believed people close to Biggie knew about the attack, especially after Biggie released the song "Who Shot Ya" soon afterward. Biggie insisted he had nothing to do with it and said the song had been recorded long before the shooting, but the damage was done. The East Coast-West Coast rivalry, fueled by diss tracks, media pressure, and growing paranoia about being shot, turned them into bitter enemies. But behind the scenes, Biggie reportedly feared the violence had gone too far and worried he might be next. 6 months later, Biggie was shot and killed in Los Angeles by a drive-by shooting at the young age of 24. Both murders still remain unsolved to this day, turning one of hip-hop's most famous rivalries into one of its darkest tragedies. Florida PhD chemistry student secretly poisoning his neighbor's home during a dispute over noise. In 2023, Xu Ming Lee was caught on a neighbor's security cam repeatedly entering the hallway of their apartment building and injecting liquid opioids into a family's front door and into their door frame. Soon afterward, the family inside began suffering from unexplained vomiting, severe dizziness, headaches, and breathing problems. Police later determined Lee had been targeting them because of an ongoing argument over noise. Investigators said he used his chemistry background to introduce the drugs into their home without them knowing. Lee was arrested, expelled from the university, and later deported from the United States. On March 11, 2011, as the Tohoku earthquake struck Japan, 24-year-old city employee Miki Endo stayed at her post broadcasting emergency warnings about the incoming tsunami. Over loudspeakers across the town, she repeatedly urged residents to seek higher ground, continuing even as floodwaters began rushing into the streets and into her building. She refused to leave her position and kept warning the public until the tsunami completely submerged her office building. Miki didn't survive, but her final broadcasts are credited with helping to save thousands of lives. An 18-year-old mother from Miami named Jasmine Paez was arrested after trying to hire a hitman to kill her 3-year-old son using a parody website called Rent a Hitman. Police say she filled out an online request form, uploaded a photo of her child, provided her address, and asked that the job be completed by the end of the week. In the message, she wrote that she wanted to get something done once and for all, and requested that her son be taken far, far away and possibly be killed. When investigators asked why she wanted her own son dead, Paez gave no real motive, only that she was overwhelmed and no longer wanted the responsibility of being a mother. The website's owner originally created Rent a Hitman as a joke, but after receiving hundreds of murder-for-hire requests over the years leading to multiple arrests, he now works closely with law enforcement and immediately reported Paez's request. Undercover officers posed as a hitman and arranged a meeting, where Paez allegedly confirmed she wanted the child dead. She was arrested and charged with solicitation to commit murder, and the boy was placed into protective custody unharmed. Before he became famous, Vanilla Ice claims he survived a brutal stabbing and a near-fatal nightclub attack. When he was 16, he got caught in the middle of a gang fight in South Dallas and was stabbed 5 times, one wound narrowly missing his heart. Doctors reportedly said the blade came so close that another half-inch would have killed him. Months later, he was nearly beaten to death outside a club after a show, leaving him with permanent nerve damage in his arm. This doll belonging to a 5-year-old girl has been watching over her gravesite since her death in 1912. In April of 2001, 20-year-old Branson Perry completely vanished from his father's home in Skidmore, Missouri. He told a friend he was stepping outside to put a pair of jumper cables into the shed, but was never seen again. His van, wallet, and all personal belongings were left behind. Despite searches, interviews, and 2 decades of investigation, no remains have ever been found and no one has ever been charged. To this day, Branson Perry's disappearance remains one of Missouri's most haunting unsolved cases. In 2012, Florence Welch of Florence and the Machine nearly died from an undiagnosed ectopic pregnancy, which happens when a fertilized egg implants outside the uterus, usually in a fallopian tube, where it can't grow and can rupture suddenly, causing severe internal bleeding. She went on stage while bleeding internally, thinking it was normal pain, and later learned her fallopian tube had ruptured, leaving what doctors described as a Coke can's worth of blood inside her abdomen. She required emergency surgery to remove the tube and stop the internal bleeding. Florence later said it was the closest she's ever come to dying by far. In 2023, 16-year-old Bryce Brooks from Atlanta jumped into the ocean in Pensacola to save 4 younger kids he'd never met who were being pulled out by a strong rip current. He managed to help get them to safety, but the current dragged him under before he could escape. A family friend, 67-year-old Charles Johnson II, rushed in attempting to save Bryce but was also pulled under. The 4 children survived, but Bryce and Charles didn't make it, and both were later honored as heroes for sacrificing their lives to save others. Trailer Park Boys star Mike Smith, best known as the harmless wide-eyed Bubbles, has been charged with sexual assault in Nova Scotia for an incident that allegedly happened back in 2017, a case that stayed buried for nearly 8 years before finally surfacing in court. The identity of the victim is under a strict publication ban, but Smith is now legally barred from contacting them or going anywhere near their work, home, or school. The charge has forced him to step away from the Trailer Park Boys production company, tainting the wholesome persona millions have associated with him. Deep inside a sulfur-filled cave on the Albania-Greece border, scientists have uncovered the largest spiderweb ever recorded, an enormous 106-meter sheet stretched across the cavern's walls. Hundreds of thousands of spiders from two normally rival species have formed a massive cooperative colony, a terrifying behavior never before seen in spiders. The cave's toxic, sunless environment created a self-sustaining ecosystem powered by sulfur-eating microbes which attracted swarms of insects, which in turn supplied this spider megacity with endless food. The web is so dense and vast it looks like the cave is wrapped in ghostly white fabric, proof that life can evolve into something terrifyingly efficient when pushed into extreme conditions. In 2023, British TV presenter Holly Willoughby narrowly escaped a fate straight out of a nightmare. Her stalker, 36-year-old security guard Gavin Plumb, had been secretly building what prosecutors called a murder kit in his Essex home. Ropes, metal cable ties, chloroform, and knives, all carefully organized for a late-night abduction. He spent over 18 months plotting every step, obsessively saving thousands of images of Willoughby, including hundreds of deepfakes he made to fuel his fantasies. Plumb shared his entire plan with someone he met on a dark chat room called Abduct Lovers, where over 100 members spent hours trading violent fantasies. He even sent voice memos describing how they'd hit at night when traffic was low, and how he'd chloroform both of them, referring to Willoughby and her husband. But what he didn't know was that his online partner wasn't a killer, he was an undercover US federal agent. When British police stormed Plumb's apartment, they found his computer filled with explicit material, detailed kidnap instructions, and surveillance notes about Willoughby's security routines. He knew her full schedule and had even written down what time she usually woke up. In July of 2024, Plumb was sentenced to life in prison with at least 16 years before parole. On November 10, 1975, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, one of the largest freighters to ever sail the Great Lakes, vanished without a single distress call. She was hauling 26,000 tons of iron ore across Lake Superior, a route sailors today still call the graveyard of the Great Lakes. As a brutal storm ripped across the lake, wind gusts reached hurricane force and waves rose over 30 feet. Nearby ships radioed that the Fitzgerald was taking whitewater over the deck, and her radar was down, vents smashed, and one of her lifeboats already torn apart by the waves. At 7:10 p.m., Captain Ernest McSorley made his final transmission, "We are holding our own." Minutes later, the 729-foot ship dropped off radar completely. When search teams managed to locate the wreck 2 days later, the bow was found buried more than 20 feet into the lake bed, showing how quick the ship plummeted through the water. The crew quarters were crushed flat, showing how violently the ship hit the bottom. So fast, the men never even reached their emergency stations. Divers later found crew hard hats still sitting neatly in their storage racks. All 29 crew members were lost, as not a single body was ever recovered. While the exact cause of the sinking still remains a mystery, many experts believe the Fitzgerald was struck by a rare Three Sisters, a set of massive rogue waves that can swallow a vessel in seconds, snapping the large ship in two and sending all 29 men to their graves 530 feet below the surface. In 1995, divers retrieved the ship's bell, the only piece ever brought to the surface, and replaced it with a memorial bell engraved with all 29 names. Every November 10th, it's rung 29 times, one toll for each life lost. In 2010, 77-year-old rancher and hunting expert Don Alejo lived alone on a piece of land near Ciudad Victoria, Mexico, when a local cartel began demanding that he hand over his ranch, a common tactic in the region. They suddenly gave him 24 hours to vacate the property or be killed. Alejo told them he'd think about it, but instead, when the cartel left, he prepared for war. That night, he stayed up fortifying his home. He barricaded doors, moved furniture into firing positions, and set up multiple loaded rifles and shotguns at windows facing all approaches. At dawn, several cartel trucks rolled in expecting an easy takeover, but instead, the gunmen walked straight into a one-man ambush. From inside the house, Don Alejo opened fire with military-level precision. The firefight lasted nearly an hour, and by the time authorities arrived, they found 4 cartel members dead and at least 2 more critically wounded. The house was torn apart by gunfire, and Don Alejo was found inside, killed by return fire, still clutching his shotgun. Mexican Marines who processed the scene later said it was obvious he knew he wouldn't survive. He had prepared it as a final stand. Don Alejo's ranch was never taken by the cartel, and he became a national symbol of defiance in a region where most people are too terrified to fight back. Victoria Wright was born with cherubism, a rare genetic disorder that causes the bones in the lower face to grow erratically, giving her a swollen, distorted appearance that drew cruel comments from strangers her entire life. The condition can be extremely painful by tightening the jaw, straining the facial nerves, and making basic things like chewing or even speaking very difficult at times. As a child, she endured constant looks, bullying, and even adults snickering about her in public as if she wasn't standing right there. But instead of hiding, she turned her diagnosis into a mission, calling out the cruelty she faced after a BBC documentary sparked a wave of online abuse, and becoming a fierce advocate for people with facial differences. In 2015, Mary Cerruti vanished from her Houston bungalow without a trace. 2 years later, the new owners found her skeletal remains sealed inside a wall along with her glasses and shoes. Investigators believe she fell through the attic floor and became trapped, slowly dying alone in total darkness with no way of climbing out. But because she was one of the last homeowners refusing to sell as developers closed in around her, many people still suspect something darker. Her official cause of death remains undetermined. Kim Kardashian's 2018 Met Gala photo, taken in front of the gilded coffin of Nedja Monk, caught the attention of the Manhattan DA's Antiquities Trafficking Unit. When investigators looked into the artifact's paperwork, they discovered the export documents were forged and the coffin had actually been looted from Egypt in 2011. The viral photo helped trigger the investigation that ultimately exposed the trafficking network and led to the coffin being returned to Egypt in 2019. When Yoshitaro Shibasaki and his team scaled Mount Tsurugi in 1907, believed at the time to be Japan's final unclimbed peak, they were stunned to find ancient relics already waiting at the summit. A decorative metal staff fitting and a sword were discovered near the top, and later analysis revealed they'd been placed there over 1,000 years earlier. This 250-year-old mechanical swan still glides and bends its neck as if it were still alive. Built in 1773 by master showman James Cox and ingenious inventor John Joseph Merlin, the automaton uses hundreds of hidden clockwork components to make the bird preen, ripple the water below it, and even snatch a silver fish from the stream. In 1835, a man digging a duck pond in Margate, England, accidentally discovered the Shell Grotto, an underground chalk passage decorated with about 4.6 million seashells arranged across 2,000 square feet of mosaic. Most of the shells, mussels, oysters, scallops, etc., appear to have been collected from nearby Kent beaches, though some are foreign species. Its age, purpose, and creators remain completely unknown. To unlock the secrets of a genius, the man who performed Einstein's autopsy stole his brain and kept it in a jar for 20 years. He found that the part of Einstein's brain that processes math and language was 15% bigger than the average human's. Throughout history, a total of 9 nuclear submarines have been lost around the world. Most of them are still on the ocean floor with nuclear weapons that are still intact. When the Soviet Union was pushing toward Berlin during World War II, a Nazi SS soldier was forced to play piano for his captors. They made it clear to him in sign language that he would be executed the moment he stopped playing. He played for 22 straight hours, after which he collapsed in tears. They congratulated him, then shot him. The details revealed in Michael Jackson's autopsy report were nothing short of disturbing. He was almost completely bald and had a number of cosmetic tattoos, including permanent eyeliner and lip liner. He had puncture wounds all over his arms and had nothing but pills in his stomach at the time of death. Michael had also undergone at least 10 nose jobs, leaving him with a left nostril that was almost completely collapsed. In 1963, the Bronx Zoo had an exhibit called The Most Dangerous Animal in the World. The entire exhibit was just a mirror. Serial killer Richard Chase once attempted to enter a woman's home but walked away after realizing her doors were locked. Chase later told detectives that he took locked doors as a sign that he wasn't welcome, but that unlocked doors were an invitation to come inside. Born in 1661, Charles II of Spain was the result of 200 years of inbreeding that intended to strengthen the family line. He was breastfed until the age of 4 and never fully learned how to walk. As an adult, he was completely illiterate and could barely chew or speak due to his deformed jaw. He was so ugly and disfigured that his own wife was terrified of him. In 2010, a Canadian man rescued a newborn baby from a dumpster only to find out that he was the father. In isolation wards where patients die alone, nurses fill gloves with warm water to simulate the touch of their loved ones. They call it the hand of God. In 1990, British Airways Flight 5390 experienced a window failure in the cockpit, causing the captain to be sucked out. But the crew held on to him for 20 minutes and he miraculously survived despite some frostbite and a few fractures. An 18-year-old girl from Alaska was encouraged to murder her best friend by a boy she met online who claimed to be a multimillionaire. She then convinced 4 others to help her so that they could split a $9 million prize. It ended up being a total scam perpetrated by a mentally disabled man from Indiana. The assassin bug wears the corpses of its prey like a backpack. After stabbing its prey and slurping out the innards, the insect uses the corpses as armor and camouflage. In 1991, Patricia Stallings was sentenced to life in prison for poisoning her child with antifreeze. She then gave birth to a second child while in prison, who was given to a foster care. But he eventually became sick with the same symptoms as the first child, indicating a rare metabolic disorder, not poisoning. This proved her innocence and she was released. This is the last known photo of Freddie Mercury before his death in 1991. In order order to avoid the attention, Freddie denied rumors about having AIDS until the day before he died. During the Middle Ages, it was believed that sperm produced from the left testicle resulted in having a girl. So to ensure having a son, men would often have their left testicle removed in a painful surgery. In the 1960s, Canadian woodsman Francis Wharton shot a deer and made dentures out of its teeth. He then proceeded to eat the deer with the deer's own teeth. A cat named Oscar correctly predicted the deaths of over 50 patients at a nursing home in Rhode Island. Soon after he arrived at the home, staff noticed that Oscar chose to nap next to patients who would die a few hours later. Nurses would sometimes even place Oscar next to patients they thought would die, but he would move to other patients and be correct every time. Baby Molly Gibson was born in October of 2020, but she was technically 27 years old at her birth, just 2 years younger than her mom. Her embryo was donated in 1992 and stored in a liquid nitrogen tank until she was adopted in 2020 for in vitro fertilization. In 1994, a Russian pilot allowed his 16-year-old son to sit at the controls of the plane, but his son accidentally disabled the autopilot, crashing the plane and killing all 75 passengers on board. From the time of its discovery to its demotion, Pluto didn't even make one full revolution around the sun. If you hit someone with your car in China, you must pay for their medical care for the rest of their life. But if you kill someone with your car, you only have to pay a one-time fee. For this reason, it's common for people to go back and kill someone they accidentally hit. Shortly after going missing for 6 days, Edgar Allan Poe died a mysterious death. When he was found, he was wearing another man's cheap clothing and couldn't explain where he'd been. Acting delirious and distressed, he was brought to the hospital where he died of unknown causes at the age of 40. Bella and Edward's relationship throughout the Twilight series meets all 15 official criteria for an abusive relationship.